Good evening, gang. Welcome to Showdown. Well, joining me tonight is Radical Radio's Lynn Samuels, sitting in for Richard G. Carter. And Lynn, I guess the recent appointment of former Indiana Commissioner Dr. Woody Myers as New York City's health commissioner kind of sparked another AIDS controversy. It seems Dr. Myers had the audacity to suggest chronically ill AIDS carriers who demonstrate an inability or unwillingness to keep it in their panties be quarantined. Now, should we consider quarantine or not? We'll ask Dr. Cory SerVaas, a member of the Presidential AIDS Commission and the publisher of the Saturday Evening Post, when we come back after this. Joining Lynn and myself tonight live by satellite from Indianapolis is Dr. Cory SerVaas. Dr. SerVaas was the member of the Presidential AIDS Commission, and she is, as I said earlier, the publisher of the Saturday Evening Post. Doctor, good evening and welcome.
Good evening.
May I ask you if you would briefly tell us the history of Indiana's quarantine law from whence Dr. Woody Myers appears, and why you support it?
I'm sorry. I guess our hookup isn't good enough. And
I'm sorry, Lynn. Please, Dr. SerVaas, the question I ask is, would you be kind enough to briefly explain to us the history of Indiana's quarantine law and why you support it?
Well, I think that our law shouldn't be called a quarantine at all. I think it's semantics that gets people worried. I guess I discovered today that we have had only 2 occasions to use this law and go to court. And in one occasion, this young man was put into the custody of his parents. In the other, the young man was helped into a clinic, health clinic for mental health, and he is being treated and counseled and given therapy.
Well, let me ask the question, Doctor, then. It begs, I guess, an answer. What is the quarantine about? Is it anyone who has AIDS, or is it indeed someone who has AIDS and continually can be proven to be promiscuous and endangering other people's health through acts of sex, for instance, or acts of exchanging needles? Would that be accurate?
No, not quite. They aren't quarantined, quote unquote quarantined, at all until they have been given a warning, until it's been established not by anonymous phone calls but by professionals that indeed they are either sharing needles or doing promiscuous acts or prostitution, things such as that. They're given a warning, and then if they heed the warning, they are not given a second
Does somebody
warning.
follow these people around? I mean, they get warned once. Does somebody follow them for the rest of their lives?
No, they are not followed, but they are given ample time to do right. And only a recalcitrant who refuses to stop endangering the lives of others is then brought to court. And we've had 11 people who have been warned, 9 of whom were subsequently found to be obeying and not being a threat to anyone else.
Were they all gay?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I couldn't tell you that exactly, but I doubt that.
And does your law, Doctor, does your law also cover people who have gonorrhea and syphilis?
We have in Indiana the contact tracing for gonorrhea and syphilis, and we've had that for years and years. We don't have contact tracing now for AIDS. They do in Colorado, and as you know, probably they do in Minnesota. We do not.
But in the contact tracing that you have for venereal disease, do you indeed take these people into court? And if they again go around winking their weenie, do you put them before the court and have them go get mental health treatment?
You know, that question is you have two parts to it. We have people who have syphilis and gonorrhea, and we do contact tracing. We go to the people to protect the people with whom they've had sex so that we can bring them into the hospital and treat them. And we do treat AIDS like a medical problem that it is. We treat AIDS patients very much like we treat tuberculosis patients. And I don't know if you realize, but in tuberculosis, if someone is endangering the health of another, we are able to put them into treatment.
Tuberculosis is an airborne disease. AIDS is a disease of intimacy. Why would you treat them the same?
Well, I should say that we treat them the same in that we give them help and we give them medication and we try to get them over their infectiousness in the case of tuberculosis. And as you probably know, AIDS leaves one very vulnerable for tuberculosis, and a lot of the tuberculosis of AIDS, as I understand, is harder to treat than tuberculosis normally is, although it's very treatable. And the AIDS victims, AIDS patients are much more likely to have tuberculosis. And
Doctor, let me interrupt for just 1 second. Realistically, aren't we saying here that this issue has been transformed from a health one into a political one by the gay activists? Doctor, you haven't heard me my finished question. That has been transferred from a health issue into a political issue by the gay activists in this movement.
Oh, I think that is right. I didn't hear the rest of your statement. It shouldn't be a political thing at all, and I think that Indiana probably is getting a very bad rap about the word quarantine. We're talking about recalcitrant people who maybe have very definite problems because of their AIDS. AIDS, in all of the AIDS hospitals where I visited in San Francisco, and this huge AIDS ward, many of these young people were demented. We had a lot of AIDS patients, in my experience, when we were visiting, who weren't themselves, certainly. It affects their neurological system.
Now, only some people. What qualifies you to be on the President's AIDS Commission?
What qualified me?
Yes, you.
I was qualified because when the AIDS epidemic began, and I started working in AIDS from the time the CDC had 11 patients and had reported just 11. And at that time, Jim Curran was the head of the AIDS department there. And we established an AIDS mobile, and we went to places where there were drug users early on and tested AIDS-free, and helped these drug abusers who were in programs like Teen Challenge, where they had come to the Lord and were no longer on drugs, but a huge percentage of these young people were then already AIDS positive. We tested some 297 in Pennsylvania, and I think we had 91 positives. And they were with care, they had good physicians, and we did this in our foundation, a nonprofit foundation, at no cost.
Doctor, let us take a break for just a moment.
Okay.
Good credentials by anyone's stretch. When we return, is the fear of discrimination and possible exposure really killing thousands? Stay with us. Lynn and myself will be back. My co-host tonight, of course, Lynn Samuels, who all of you know, the radical radio talker. And we're talking with Dr. Cory SerVaas, who is the publisher of the Saturday Evening Post and a former member of the President's Commission on AIDS, I should say. Doctor, how big a factor is fear of exposure or reprisal in the implementation and enlightenment of AIDS?
I think that has been highly overrated. In Colorado, where the testing is being done and they do contact tracing, they found that more, not fewer, people come in to be tested. It doesn't prove out that people don't get tested for AIDS for fear.
Have you ever heard of homophobia? Have you ever heard of homophobia? Do you know that a man on Staten Island in New York was murdered a couple of weeks ago by guys that just ran around calling him faggot? Gay people are killed in this country that's increased 3 times over the last couple of years, the number of gays who are attacked simply because they're gay, not even because they have AIDS. How can you say that has nothing to do with it?
No, but there's sickos around who kill blacks simply because they're blacks, who kill Jews because they're Jews.
But
I mean, there's sickos all over.
black can't hide that he's black. A gay person doesn't necessarily want to be tested for AIDS. If you
You mean to tell me that a gay person is as obviously gay as black is obviously black?
No, I'm saying the exact opposite. But if you make it that people are being quarantined, people are going to go after gay people simply because they're gay, not because they're HIV positive or because they have AIDS.
All over. There's sickos all over.
But
I'm not saying I agree with quarantine.
I don't mean sickos.
I'm all for quarantines where you've got, Dr. SerVaas, where you've got air exchanged diseases, all right? I don't favor AIDS quarantine unless, as she says, you got some guy who's going out there as a male prostitute after he's been picked up, diagnosed as having AIDS, and knows he has AIDS, and he's out pimping his little butt around to someone and giving the AIDS to someone else. No, that son of a bitch belongs in jail for attempted murder.
Possibly.
Why? What we do, we have a court.
What about
they have a hearing in court before this is done.
Of somebody in this day and age? What about the utter stupidity of somebody who would even go to a male prostitute? Where's that person's responsibility to protect himself?
All right, what about a female prostitute who has AIDS? Do you want her on the street? And do you want that female prostitute with AIDS after being told that she should discontinue, who says, it's the only way I have to make a living, I'm going to do it, and she continues to do it?
No, I don't want her to, but what about men? In this day and age, anybody who would have sex unprotected with a prostitute or with a stranger, they belong in mental institutions.
How do you say unprotected, all right? You're saying that you need to wear a condom, all right? Which are only 70% effective. So you now only have a 3 in 10 chance of getting AIDS.
No, but I'm saying you're putting the whole responsibility on the person who may test HIV positive. What about the moron that's going to bed with them?
The primary responsibility has to be on the bearer of the disease. Whether it's a guy with gonorrhea, whether he's got the old drips or whatever it is, the guy ought to be off the street.
That's right, but you can't lock everybody up who does something wrong. What about people?
Why can't you? We lock people. There's 787,000 people locked up in this country. I'm not sure all of them did something wrong.
They say that you can get cancer from secondhand smoke. What about certain people who smoke cigarettes all the time and are possibly giving cancer to the people just sitting there? Should they lock those people up?
So I gave you something for Valentine's.
We're not really talking, Lynn, we're not talking about locking people up in Indiana. We shouldn't use the word quarantine at all, but you can put someone who's an IV drug abuser into a treatment center and treat him for his needle-sharing habit, where he's killing other people.
Aren't we playing games with that, doctor? Can we, when we say IV drug, that has become now the thing we have to say so that we don't offend the gay community. IV drug abuser, and I think also people who, and Andy Rooney, I'm sorry, I don't want to get in the same bag you're in, but people who have sex in ways that is not healthy, those people have to be brought in too.
We've known that the homosexual acts are unhealthy. They've given men hepatitis for years. We've known that they have more hemorrhoids, they have more hepatitis, and far more hepatitis.
What about herpes, doctor?
They have more herpes.
You know that there is
right now they have
there is nothing that 2 men can do that a man and a woman can't do. Also.
They have more syphilis, they have more hepatitis. Now that's just spoken like a medical person. That we're not saying we're discriminating. We've always known they have more hepatitis.
What about herpes, doctor? That's dropped right off the charts now. Nobody talks about that. And the women ought to know about that disease because they were raising holy hell.
Don't point at me.
Women raised holy hell, sued their mates. I got herpes from them, therefore I want $2 million for a little bubble or whatever the hell he has.
That's different than quarantine.
But now, you see, that was a woman's issue. That was great for the women. But now the women don't like this issue anymore. I'm sorry, doctor, go ahead.
You should forget the word quarantine. That isn't what we call it in Indiana. We call it recalcitrant. I have the bill here. It's a perfectly good bill.
By any other name,
Doctor. No, Minnesota is called recalcitrant.
It's
they got
treatment,
that through
it's
in the
counseling.
Home of, Walter Mondale.
But even if you don't want to call it quarantine, if you don't want to call it quarantine and you're forcing people against their will to do something, then what is it?
Well, when we put people in prison for doing attempted murder, we call that something too. But we're talking about treating, and we're talking about giving a court hearing. And in Indiana, we're talking about two people. Since we passed this bill over a year ago, two people who have not done what they should do, and who have been one put in custody of his parents, and he's being monitored by his parents and by counselors and by physicians, and he gets to choose the physician of his choice to do this. A health professional will take care of him.
Let me tell you something. We're going to come back, all right, and we're going to ask Dr. SerVaas about the current status of the AIDS epidemic. We continue after this.
Doctor, now you're on the Presidential Commission on AIDS, so you know everything about this. Is the AIDS problem now on the increase or the decrease?
Well, I think that it's probably on the increase among the teenagers of the country. And I believe that the college and high school, the tests that have been done have indicated that. And the biggest bank of information comes from the military, who tests 17, 18, and 19-year-olds. And they test before they're admitted to the military, as you probably know. And during the AIDS Commission, one of the colonels came to me and said, why Indiana? Why is Indiana in the third worst state in the nation in number of teenagers who are infected? And that's 17, 18, and 19-year-olds. And I couldn't tell him why, except that we're probably very complacent here, and our teenagers don't think that they could get AIDS. I was shocked when I looked at the records there, and how 17-year-olds, there are more women, more girls applying for the military at 17, almost twice as many as boys. At 18, they're equal. And at 19, there are twice as many young men as young women applying for the military who are infected with AIDS.
And what is the percentage of AIDS in these kids?
And the percentage of AIDS in this case would be, I'm trying to remember the numbers, for the various states. Overall, it seemed to me that it would have, and I hesitate to say, I can't remember.
Because you realize, you know that AIDS has sort of leveled off in the gay community because of the responsible attitude of gay people. It's leveled off, and it's going up among mostly IV drug users who are probably too stoned to know what they're doing.
But you see, what we do is we take the IV drug users and we don't identify them as anything other than IV drug users. Is their percentage also the same percentage as gays and bisexuals right within that little area? I don't know.
I don't like to say there are many drug users who aren't IV drug users who have AIDS because of promiscuity, and they prostitute themselves for money to get money for crack, and they don't have to be IV drug abusers to have AIDS.
Doctor, you've been involved in this since the very beginning, all right, with the CDC. So let me go back and try and refresh members of our audience's mind. Back in the early 1980s, actually 1979, 1980, 81, the scream went out that this was going to become a raging epidemic in the heterosexual community. And sure enough, by 1983, 2% of the heterosexual community, as identified only heterosexual, had AIDS. The last year that this was available in information was 1988, and lo and behold, it had exploded to 2% of the heterosexual community. Was that a political move that was made to get people so frightened that they'd fund it?
You know, you were cutting in and out on the, and so that I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
I'm simply asking, has it exploded in the heterosexual community when 8 years ago there was 2% and now there's only 2%?
I don't like exploded at all, but I think that it's going to be going up. And the heterosexual, if you think about the AIDS babies in New York and in Miami, the AIDS babies that I saw, and I don't see that diminishing, I see that increasing, AIDS babies. And that's for mothers who don't know they're AIDS positive, many mothers who do not know. I'd say that the epidemic is going down in the hemophiliacs. At the time I first began in AIDS, we had 95% of our hemophiliacs infected with HIV. Then we went down because we then have better materials for testing and getting them their heat-treated medications. And so that the hemophiliacs, we don't have that large number anymore. The young kids coming on stream with hemophilia aren't getting infected with AIDS
we
now.
can test the blood supply. But you see, the point is that the reason maybe it had to be politicized to think that a lot of heterosexuals were going to get it is because there are so many homophobics. And nobody likes drug addicts.
Homophobics. Lynn, I don't think homophobia is the problem. I think the feeling that you have a right to have AIDS, you have a right to spread AIDS. I think the reason the hemophiliacs got all infected was we waited 2 years too long to stop taking blood from homosexuals in Manhattan.
That can come after
I mean, you can go too far, Lynn. You can go too far.
No.
Yes, you went too far in New York.
People do not like homosexuals to begin with.
Don't say people
Large numbers of
the medical
profession. You got some people who don't want to have anything to do with homosexuals. But you got a larger amount of people who say live and let live, man, as long as you don't
more attention would have been paid to this disease much earlier on if it had been a heterosexual disease?
I'll tell you what I think, Doctor. I think that it was very politicized, Lynn. I think it was very politicized. And wouldn't we all be attending fundraisers for sickle cell anemia if we thought that was a disease that infected middle America? But it isn't. It's a disease mainly with the blacks, so it's ignored.
I think that we're not ignoring AIDS. I think we're working very hard on AIDS. I think we've spent a large amount of money on AIDS. I think AIDS will prevent a lot of very good research from ever happening for geriatric patients. I think the artificial lung will stand back and wait. I think the artificial heart will stand back and wait.
I think the 200,000 people who die every year from Alzheimer's disease and only get $10 million worth of funding while $2 billion goes into a disease that kills 30,000 people.
30,000, but this is a disease of the very young people, and I think that it's tragic, and I think we need all the research we can get because it is contagious. But
Doctor,
I blame New York City for being too slow in stopping the solicitation for blood.
I agree with Lynn only in the fact that I am not in favor of quarantining or as you say, having whatever that word was you used.
We don't like quarantine either.
Yeah,
well,
I don't like that unless you're going to quarantine the jerk who has syphilis and the bozo who has gonorrhea and everything else.
And
the drunk driver
smoker.
Not the smoker.
A rapist
not the
with
smoker.
AIDS.
We can still smoke. Doctor, thank you very much for being with us tonight. No quarantine, but by the same time and the same token, Woody has a right to his opinion, and he's the new health supervisor in New York. Good night, everybody.
Watching CNBC, the Consumer News and Business Channel.